We are all going to die. If we have anywhere to find unity in this increasingly divided time where the safety of our bodies and the future of the world is a constant question, we can find unity in this simple truth. We are all going to die. And there is no power of God nor power of humanity that can prevent you from dying. And this is the great frustration of our modern age that has built entire industries to displace the anxiety of death, specifically onto the marginalized and the oppressed, those who already live with the reality of death thrust upon them. If you are wealthy today, you have access to medicines and procedures that can literally infuse you with more life, pharmaceuticals that promise more life and the avoidance of death, so long as you keep making them richer and tolerate the extreme wealth disparity that makes basic health care increasingly unaffordable to greater and greater numbers of people. We have a housing system that prioritizes the construction of beautiful new neighborhoods, affordable only to the wealthiest in our society at the cost of treating shelter as a basic human right. Our national politics is built around a militaristic obsession with war, with delivering death and destruction to places around the world already suffering deep loss, investing trillions of dollars to generate death elsewhere so we don't pay attention to the death of our social fabric and our fellow citizens at home. This displacement of death can even be present in our religious spaces. If you are wealthy and white, you can go to a church where you won't be reminded of the imminence of death, the reality that we are all going to die, and instead focus on victory, wealth, prosperity, success, a theology of glory that tells you that God has chosen you to experience good things exclusively and that death won't enter into your life until the very end. Why do you think that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America? Those of us with the privilege to displace death don't want the reminder that for most people, death is a daily reality because of the color of your skin, because of the money or lack thereof that you possess, because the gender that you inhabit, because of where you live in the world. But we are all going to die. And look where this displacement of death has led us. We have abandoned our elders, leaving them to experience isolation when their age becomes an inconvenient reminder of our inevitable fate. We have abandoned our children to the anxiousness and anguish, unable to adjust to a world where death is a dominant reality that they have been given no resilience to resolve or endure. We have abandoned our grieving, the people who need the church the most, to the promise of growth, power, and progress, rather than trusting that the ministry of presence is all that the Holy Spirit needs to transform the world. See how our society decays, how every system of trust necessary for a functioning life and ecosystem is crumbling apart. I declare that this is because we have tried to inoculate ourselves from the fear of death, displacing death ever elsewhere in our addiction to life. And by living according to this theology of glory that tempts us with the false promise of an exclusively good and perfect life, we have forgotten that unity, empathy, salvation come from the reality of death alone. Put more simply, the only path towards reconciliation begins with the acknowledgement that we are all going to die. Because when we acknowledge that we are going to die, then we recognize that there is truly nothing that can separate us from the love of God. that seeks out sinners in the spaces of death. Jesus does not come to spend time with those committed to the delusion that they are well, but that they are righteous, that they are perfect, that they are free from death. Jesus comes to spend time with those who know that they are lost to sin and cannot free themselves, whose goal is not to acquire wealth, power, or privilege, the displacement of death, for themselves, but who celebrate by supporting one another, who eat and drink and find joy amidst the misery of living in a deeply challenging world where the only thing that unifies us is death. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, does not lift up a ministry of reconciliation that comes from a theology of glory, but a theology of the cross. Reconciliation for Paul comes through the solidarity of death. First, Jesus' ultimate act of solidarity on the cross, followed by our own solidarity with all the dying as we endure afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, and hunger for the sake of those we love, for the sake of those who do not deserve to have death displaced upon them. Consider, please, what this world would look like if instead of keeping our distance from suffering, every person who calls themselves a Christian committed to enduring suffering for the sake of those who have lived their entire life under the threat of death. What would such a world look like? Does this not sound better, healthier, more whole than the divided world we have today, a world reconciled by the reality that we are all going to die? If so, we owe it to one another to do everything in our power to keep each other alive for as long as we can, even at the risk of our own lives, because indeed, Jesus looked to us and decided that our lives and eternal lives were worth protecting and preserving, so much so that he risked his own life so that we may live our own. Jesus, knowing that we are all going to die, chose to live in such a way that delivered more life for all people. For the day of God that the prophet Joel proclaims is a terrifying day if we live in a society that fears and displaces death. But if we embrace the reality that we are all going to die, then we embrace the new life that God brings out of death. We embrace the truth that we are dust, that we are ashes, that all the great works of humanity, all the things we hold dear, will one day become ashes on the path to being made new. The day of God is nothing to fear with a theology of the cross that trusts in the reality of death as the power or path towards resurrection. So here is the challenge I offer as we enter into Lent. What in our lives, our world, our society needs to realize, recognize that it is going to die? Is it you? Is it the church? Is it our government, America itself? What or who needs to realize that their destiny is ashes, so that we can find unity in the universal truth that we are all going to die? Because the answer is that we all do. And never has this world needed the humility of death to bring reconciliation more than today. We were given the opportunity of empathy at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, but instead of reconciliation, our society chose a theology of glory, rather than the theology of the cross that finds God's love and truth in the truth that we are all going to die. And because we could not let our glory die, we are more divided than ever. So find the courage this Lent to accept death as the path to life. Ground yourself in the reality that you and all that you love and live for is going to die, because how can you look at your neighbor who is vulnerable, who is going to die, and not respond with compassion? How can you look to yourself, who is vulnerable, who is going to die, and not realize that you are worthy of all the assistance and help and love that this world has to offer? How can you look at the earth so close to death and not do everything in your power to preserve and sustain and care for it? Hear this truth. You are worthy of all the love of God, not because you are strong, but because you are weak. You are worthy of all the healing of God, not because you are immune, but because you are vulnerable. You are worthy of all the salvation of God, not because you are perfect, but because you are sinful. You are worthy of the cross of Jesus Christ, not because you are going to live forever, but because you are going to die. Now is the acceptable time when God brings transformation to this world by freely and eagerly inviting us into the life that the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ brings. So do not displace death. Do not hide from the one truth that has the potential to reconcile humans to humans and humans to God. We are all, including God, destined to die. We are all ashes, destined to become ashes. And thank God for this truth, because ashes and dust are God's chosen building materials to create new life.